Hello everybody, it's Deanna Minnick. Welcome to our final Detox Challenge webinar. This is the fourth in the series and the final one. So thanks for being here tonight, or if you're listening to the recording, congratulations, you did it. I'd like you all just to give yourself a big hug or a big pat on the back. Here we are at the end of our journey together, and it's been quite a remarkable journey. You know, I've actually done these detoxes in smaller groups, but have never had this degree of support, camaraderie. Just really, I think that all of you are a very unique group in the way that you've come together, supporting each other, and really coming through the challenges as well as the successes has been just incredible. So I want to compliment you on your progress through this and, just really take time to celebrate, because many times we don't take that time. We're always moving on to the next thing. And, of course, we are moving on to the next thing of food reintroductions. But I'd like for you to sneak in some time there where you are celebrating your diligence, your determination, every ounce of energy that you put into this detox challenge. I really want you to carve out some time where you really reflect and just enjoy that moment of really being in that final stage and allowing yourself to celebrate. Okay, so normally in these webinars what we do is we have a guest speaker, and it's something inspirational. We've got a dialogue. And while we wanted to do that for this final webinar, we realized that there is just really too much information to impart. So this is going to be a very nuts and bolts type of webinar. And then at the end, we're going to do a little bit of a thank you and a rolling out of the red carpet to all of our lovely hosts and people that have participated in the challenge. So the way I'd like to do this is have this be very interactive. So I've got Sarah who is helping me and fielding your questions, and I want you to be typing in your questions via the chat forum as they come in. Preferably, let's answer them when we're on the slide addressing that very topic rather than wait to the end. So Sarah will be addressing those questions with me, texting them to me, and so hopefully we'll get as many of them as we can answered as we go. And I know that you will have a lot of questions. So where are we in terms of the challenge, right? So let's cover a couple of things before we dive into the food reintroductions. Let's just talk a little bit about the Facebook group page, because I know that there have been a number of questions about it. So here are the details in case you haven't been on Facebook in a while and in case you need some clarity. So you will have until 12 noon Eastern Daylight Time on October 6th, so that's essentially 1 week from now, to download all of the materials that you want. These are people's quotes, the audios, the PDFs of the emails, the recipes, and also what Sarah has put together with our Food and Spirit team is the opportunity to have everything in one place, because I know it's kind of unwieldy to download everything from Facebook. So we are going to have these materials in one PDF as of tomorrow. So I talked with Sarah this morning, and what we're going to wait for is the recording from this webinar. We're going to put everything in one document and email it out to everybody. So look for that in your email. Definitely check your junk mail, your spam folder, just like we've been encouraging you to do, but you'll have everything in one place. So that'll be easy for you, and all of the links will be active to all of the audio recordings. So after this date, we're anticipating that there will be no need for any additional support. And so please take the time to get that email tomorrow. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us or to find us on Facebook, and we'll figure out how to get that to you if you did not receive for some reason. So one other thing that's kind of unique based on the detoxes that I've done in the past is that because this is such a large group and you all have very specific and individualized needs, of course, we feel like it would be great to gift you with an additional week of support as you go through these food reintroductions. You know, you just put yourself through an amazing experiment of 21 days of removing the main food triggers. So now there's another phase to this, which is starting to reintroduce foods and seeing how your body responds. So we want to be there so that you are doing that part right. So this webinar is key for helping you to understand how to do this. And many different functional medicine practitioners do it just a little bit differently, but essentially I'm presenting what you have in your dietary guidebook. So it should be pretty straightforward. Now, after October 6th, you are on your own. You should have had the opportunity to do at least 2 food reintroductions. You should have a pretty good rhythm of how to do this. And from that point on, you can continue on. And what you're wanting to do is develop a personalized food plan. So you can figure out what you react to, and if you don't react to a food, including it back into your eating regimen if that's what you choose. And if you do react, then making the choice to keep it out of your eating regimen. And hopefully you do that. And otherwise, again, building up symptoms and a response to that food. We do also recommend that you work with a functional medicine practitioner longer term. One of the things that I've seen on the Facebook page is that many of you are asking about your particular clinical conditions, and some of them are quite complex, and some of you have multiple clinical conditions. Some of you have expressed that you have not seen relief from this elimination diet. So in that case, what I would recommend is, again, working with a practitioner who is skilled in the art of looking at the root of why you have certain conditions and trying out other functional medicine-based protocols and working with you more exclusively and tailoring the approach to your specific needs. Okay, now one other question that just came in from Sarah is Christina is asking how often she should detox if she lives in a tropical area. When are the best times? So what we do at Food and Spirit is we offer a detox twice per year, March and September, because these seem to be key months where we're transitioning in seasons. People are almost going through a resetting process. And I don't really think it matters where you live in the world. I think it's good to do this 2 to 4 times a year. And maybe for the other 2, if you decide to insert 2 more times, maybe just doing a quick 10-day or a 3-day. Some people do it like that. But essentially, I think that twice a year, and so much depends on you as a person. Are you somebody that's highly stressed? You've got a lot of toxicity in your lives? Are you living in a huge metropolis with a lot of pollution? Are you traveling a lot? There may be cases where you need to do a little bit more of a cleanse, but ultimately what you're driving towards is a personalized plan so that you don't have to do this every time, right? So that you can get a good assessment of how you shake out with certain foods, and that may change. And so that's another good reason to do a detox, because your immune system is turning over every 6 to 12 months. Your gut is turning over pretty much every week. So you've got a different physiology just within months. So it's just a good time to just reevaluate what you're eating every couple of months, if not more frequently, to be sure that you're on the right path. Okay, let me just see here. All right, so let's move on. And for those of you that have other conditions, I'm seeing some questions come in about whether it's IBS, in other words, irritable bowel syndrome, or if you've got other gut dysfunctions. There may be other programs that are more well suited to what you need. For example, there are other ways of eating like FODMAPs. FODMAPs is an acronym for the different types of sugars that sometimes people with IBS and IBD seem to be very responsive to. So there may be other types of an approach or different modalities that might be well suited to you. All right, so and in terms of supplementation, so there are some questions coming through on supplementation. Do you need certain enzymes? You know, that's a whole other question for you to work with a practitioner on, I would say. It's difficult just to say that everybody needs enzymes. You know, if you have legumes, beans, and you start to get bloated, Are you sensitive, or do you just need more pancreatic enzymes, which can be fulfilled by taking a supplement? Well, yes and yes. There's really no straightforward answer here, and that's why, again, working with a functional medicine practitioner to work on a dietary supplement regimen, tailoring those pancreatic enzymes. And maybe it's not enzymes, maybe it's hydrochloric acid for your stomach to digest protein. And there's a way for functional medicine practitioners to assess where you might be deficient in the certain, whether it's fluids or enzymes, whatever might be lacking in the digestive tract. There are certain tests and laboratory assessments that they can use for that purpose. All right, so let's move on. So the other thing is that many of you have been encouraging us to continue on with this page because there is such a great gelling of the group, and we don't really want to break the rhythm that you're all in. And, it's just lovely to see everybody creating this community as you are. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the Detox Challenge page to a participant chat page. And what this means is that you will not have hosts as you have been having. So we have co-opted the time of very busy functional medicine practitioners to be a part of this. And also on the food and spirit side, a number of different people that are trained in functional nutrition, functional medicine, have gone through graduate school training on this. But we are not going to be able to have the time to continue to oversee this page. But we did want to keep it alive for you to have conversations as you go. I think it is valuable. You can share websites with each other. But just keep in mind that there is nothing that is being given the stamp of approval from October 6th going forward on behalf of IFM or myself or the Detox Challenge overall. This is just going to be a free, fluid, very flowing page of conversation and questions that you can toss out to everybody. So I just wanted to make that really clear. All right. So let's talk about food reintroductions now. So for food reintroductions, you need two things, and you already have these things. The first thing that you need is your dietary guidebook, which we provided to you at the start. And within your dietary guidebook, if you look at pages 23 to 28, everything that I'm going to cover in this webinar is covered in your guidebook. You will also have accessible to you the food reintroduction symptom tracker, and that was sent out in an email a couple of days ago. And so you should have received that. We also posted that on Facebook via a link. And if you don't have it, we can also provide that link one more time. It's on the Institute for Functional Medicine website. So those two things are going to help you as you move through this next process of what I would call the experimentation phase. So here's what the food reintroduction symptoms tracker looks like. It's a very basic form, and I don't know if you remember this, but just a couple of days ago I was asking you about your own bodily awareness. So with your bodily awareness, what happens in your body when you eat something that you might be sensitive or allergic to? How well do you know your body? And by this time, if you've been pretty diligent and at least 80% compliant with the elimination diet, chances are your body's pretty sensitive and you're going to be able to respond. I've always found that in clinical practice that people are just so in tune with their bodies after being through this for 21 to 28 days that they're just going to know right away. So be in touch with your body as much as possible. Pay attention to even subtle signs that come up. So this is the way that you track the signs that you get after eating a food. So let's just look at the top here. So you can put your name, the date, and so what you have here is 4 days worth of tracking your symptoms. So the way that we are going to do food reintroductions, and today would officially be the first day, so for some of you that have already read ahead and got started, you're already in process, which is great. If you haven't gotten started yet, it's not too late. It's definitely, you can start tomorrow and work through these food reintroductions. So what you do, and as I'm just going to read it to you as it states at the top of the page, is to reintroduce only one new food at a time. This is super important because if you start to layer in many different foods, you're not going to know what you've reacted to. Now, let me mention one other thing. Do not change any of your supplements. If some of you are on dietary supplements and all of a sudden you decide that today you want to start a new regimen, that's not such a great idea either, unless you've been given explicit guidance from your physician or healthcare provider to do so. Just because the more variables you change, the less you know what is actually having an impact. So you want to keep things very steady eddy. So if you've had a certain activity regimen, I would say just keep that pretty constant. Notice just any other changes. Just try to keep things as stable as possible. And again, this is like being a scientist. You know, we're trying to control all of those dependent variables, right, that come up. So try to keep things steady eddy. And so what you're going to do, if you haven't done it today, starting tomorrow, eat a single food in its pure form. So let's take an example, and I'm going to walk you through this a little bit more in depth, but let me just give one quick example right now. Let's just say you want to introduce soy back into your eating. Well, soy, what I have seen, people react to different forms of soy. Soy milk can be very different than tofu, which can be very different than tempeh, which can be very different than miso. So if you choose soy, and let's just say that soy is within the realm of foods that you decide to bring back in. Now, you may say to me, well, Deanna, I don't really care about adding soy back because I'm never going to eat it. I already know I'm sensitive to it, or I've got thyroid issues. My practitioner has told me to be off of it, or I don't enjoy soy. There's too much bad press. That's fine. Don't do soy. I'm just giving you this as an example. So let's just take soy in the form of tofu. And so what we're asking you to do is to eat it 2 to 3 times in the same day. The minimum is 2 times. And typically just having one typical serving, as you might have, of tofu. So just cubing it. And what I typically like to tell patients is to have that food in isolation. And that's not always easy, right? Because you're having a mixed meal. But if you can have it in isolation, I like that better because then we don't see any of the mixed meal effects. So you have that, that serving of tofu. Let's just say you have it in the morning, and then 6 hours later, you have another serving of the tofu. And it should be a typical serving, you know, not too scant, just a normal hearty serving of whatever that food is. And if you decide to bring it in a third time, if you really want to challenge your system, and let's say that you're somebody that tends to not respond so quickly, or you don't feel like your body's so sensitive, then I would say go for 3 times of introduction. And I like to have 4 to 6 hours in between every food reintroduction. So then what you do is you do that all on day 1. So you're doing 2 or 3 times that day. You're bringing in a new food with a baseline of the elimination diet as you've been following it. Then you stop eating it, and then you wait for another day to see if you respond. There are 2 different types of reactions that we can have to food. One is an immediate reaction in which we can see within 6 to 8 hours after we eat, we get a response. For some people, it's even sooner. And then for other people, it's 24 to 48 hours. So what you're doing is you're waiting for that period of time, and then you're assessing your response in this chart here. So we're looking at day 1. What do you have in terms of the different symptoms that might come up? So you can put the time that you had the food, what the food was, and then logging whether or not you had any of the issues with anything that's stated here. So maybe you got a headache after you ate, or maybe you had some changes in your skin. Maybe you got kind of blotchy, or maybe you had some irritation or a rash show up, or maybe your energy just plummeted after having a certain food. That's really important to note. So just log this, and if you feel like this is too constraining of a form and you want to have more space, that's fine too. You know, if you print this out, you can write on the back, or you can use an additional notebook if you need that. But this should really encompass what you need. Sometimes I like to use numbers Like, how well are we doing in terms of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how does my digestion feel after I've eaten that food? 10 being the best, 1 being poor, and you can do it that way too. Okay, a couple of questions are coming through. So, okay, so here is a question. Now, this is back to a question we had about gut health. So some people have some concerns about Candida overgrowth, and rightly so. There is a lot of, we see a lot of sugar in the diet, and sugar can feed a lot of the non-beneficial bacteria that we have in our gut. And so what is typically done is to, in some cases, in this elimination diet, there were modest amounts of sweetener that were allowed. In a very strict Candida protocol, there would be no sweeteners, no starchy vegetables, and essentially no fruits. And so do you have to follow something like that? Well, I don't know if you have specific Candida issues, which is why it makes a lot of great sense to see a practitioner to evaluate your stool and or your blood, looking at certain markers to see whether or not you have a response to this particular organism. And you might also be just symptomatic in the way of having changes in mucous membranes. But typically with Candida, there are other approaches, especially with dietary supplements. Okay, let's move on. And I saw the other question from Michelle, and I think we're gonna get to that. Okay, so what I did is I cut and pasted a number of the different sections from your dietary guidebook just to show you that everything that you need is here. So again, here is how to get started. And the first thing that you have to do is really create your list of foods that you want to add back. And I've worked with patients before who say, Deanna, I feel so good, I don't want to add any foods back. And that's okay. It may come to a junction for you where you are faced with adding something back, or you're at a social function, you're at a restaurant, you want to bring something in. So it's up to you if you feel ready to do this. Could you continue on with the elimination diet and just keep going? Yes, you could. Essentially this is just a very clean way to eat, and for some people it's their only way to eat because they have so many sensitivities. So go with what feels right for you on this, and again, consult a practitioner if you feel like you need more guidance. Now, my rule of thumb is that the food that you crave the most is typically the food, and I know that my colleague Barb Schultz and I both have seen this in practice. The foods that we crave the most are typically the ones that are keeping us in dysfunction. So what you might want to do is start with that food. And I know that Dr. Younger does that as well when he does reintroductions. He goes for the big honchos like gluten and dairy. And what I would say to that is the only reason not to introduce those foods, if you already know that you have a sensitivity or allergy to those foods, you probably don't want to spend the time reintroducing them, because if you've been allergic or sensitive before and that's been verified through laboratory assessments, then chances are there's not going to be a lot of change depending on when you did that, right? And I know that there was a question on the Facebook page about gluten and people asking whether or not they should ever introduce gluten. That's, again, a personal question for you as to whether or not you think that you'd like to remain gluten-free. And I know a lot of people do feel comfortable remaining gluten-free, and then other people feel like, you know what, I just want to test that out. I want to be sure that I have some response to gluten. And until you've actually demonstrated that you've had a response, it makes it more difficult to know that you have to be compliant. But if you know that every time you eat gluten that you get gas or headaches or bloated, then it makes it easier to stay off of gluten. So whatever you feel is your impetus to stay healthy, and if that means being off of gluten and not even doing a reintroduction, that's fine. Okay, there are some questions coming in, but let me just get through this general getting started, and then I'm going to see what we didn't cover. Okay, so make a list of the foods, and typically I'll sit down with somebody and we make a list on a piece of paper. These are the foods in the order that we want to reintroduce, right? So you should have that at this point. Make a list of your top 10, whatever it is, and starting with the foods that you miss the most that you think that you will want to continue eating. Okay, so if you know that gluten is something that you're not going to want to continue eating, don't put it on the list. Now, on the first day, as I mentioned, you want to eat generous amounts of that food. So not skimpy amounts, not an overabundant, where you're stuffed and full amount, but just a normal, kind of a hearty serving size of that food. And having that twice in a day, split by 4 to 6 hours, or 3 times max within that day. And again, the baseline for you is continuing to eat the other foods from the elimination diet. So during that day and the next day, you're going to record any symptoms that you have on that food reintroduction symptoms tracker chart. Now, if there is no reaction to the food during this 2-day period, and this constitutes the 48 hours, in clinical practice, sometimes what I have done is I have allowed for another day, so day 3 to sit and wait. But, I think that what you can do, and again, this is under the guidance of many different functional medicine practitioners who all do this a little bit differently, and what we have found is that working with this 48-day window seems to be appropriate. And it's doable for many people, right? Because I'm assuming that you've got a number of different foods to start adding in, and that could take you a long time. And I think that you get a lot of information really within that first 24 to 48 hours anyway. At least that's what I have seen for the majority of people that I have seen. So what you would do if you have no reaction to this food during that 2-day window, keep that food in your food plan. So what that means is follow the elimination diet as you have, but let's just take the example of tofu. Let's just say that you didn't react to that tofu and you want to continue it, then continue to bring that into your foods, your food list, right? And here's just a good rule of thumb. I think that rotating foods every 3 to 4 days, just in general, just going beyond even the elimination diet after you're done with food reintroductions and everything, what I would say is just make sure that you get some rotation with your food, because I see that people fall into these food ruts, and then they're going to be more prone to developing food sensitivities, especially if they've got leaky gut and other inflammatory issues. Now, if you do notice that after you have that tofu that you get bloated, you feel sleepy, you've got joint pain, or even one of those symptoms, or just one thing, and again, you're going to be like a hawk and just really watching what is happening in your body. Now, if there's any question about any symptom that you get, and this has happened quite often, and I'm sure that you're going to be asking me this on Facebook this week. You're going to say, well, I'm not really sure if that headache was from the tofu or if it was because I had a really stressful day at work or because I had very little sleep. What you have to do is just stop eating the food, wait until your symptoms clear, and then try it again. Just retest that food. Okay? Now, if you know for sure that the symptoms that you have are definitely correlated to the food and it comes on pretty much right after you're eating the food or within hours or within that 48-hour window, then you don't want to include that food back into your eating. So what you want to do, let's just say that you have the headache and you have the headache after you eat the tofu. Wait until day 3, and if that headache has not subsided, and I hope by golly it has, because that would be a long time to have a headache, what you want to do then is then reintroduce a new food. But wait until you have no symptoms so that you have a clean baseline. Now let's just say that you always have symptoms because you have IBS or you have IBD or you've got some kind of chronic condition where you always have symptoms. You have to see how your symptoms change over and above the baseline of what you currently have. Okay? So go with that as your guide. Okay, let me just pause right there and look at Sarah's sending me a bunch of questions here. All right, so there's a question here about How long you need to eliminate gluten before you reintroduce to assess sensitivity? Is 3 weeks too short? She has conflicting information. This is from Michelle J. So some people might say that 3 weeks is too short. Some people might say that you need to be off gluten much longer. But what I can tell you, and I know that Dr. Younger does it this way as well, and other functional medicine docs have done a smaller, more abbreviated time frame of being off of gluten and then adding it back in. If you feel more comfortable with going longer, so what you can do is just save gluten until the last, because you probably won't be done with all of your food reintroductions for another 4 weeks or so. If you really do it right and you allow the 2 days for every food and you've got a pretty robust list, what you can do is just give yourself some more time and wait for the gluten. So yeah, and that would give you then essentially almost 2 months, or you can wait longer before you reintroduce gluten. There really is no science around this, Michelle. There really is only anecdotal clinical guidance as to what we've seen in practice on this. And so if you feel more comfortable going longer and you're open to doing that, by all means, longer being off of food would be better. Okay, Patricia is asking what might be an example of only eating chocolate. She was thinking of trying hot cocoa and almond milk that she's been eating. Okay, I'm so glad that you mentioned this, Patricia, because chocolate is a big one. How do you know if you're eating chocolate? Now, when we say chocolate, that denotes that there have been other things in it. When you say cocoa, that can denote something that's pure. So this is how I've done this with patients. I have had them delineate whether they're sensitive to cocoa or to the sugar. And I'm not even addressing the dairy here, because with milk chocolate, then we're bringing in the dairy, of course. But let's just talk about the two main things when we're eating chocolate. Even if it's 80%, 70%, there's still some sugar in there. And we don't know if we're reacting to the sugar or the chocolate. So yes, you can do the hot cocoa and almond milk. That actually sounds like a really good idea. Another thing that you can do is buy baker's chocolate and melt down a square and have that. I've had a patient once who had taken that cocoa, melted down in a double boiler, and essentially just put that over some other food that they knew that they could have, like nuts, like almonds. And then they had the cocoa in that format so that they can really assess if it's cocoa or is it the sugar. And quite honestly, there might even be a combination effect sometimes. So if you really want to do this well and do it from a very scientific perspective, you need to break apart the foods into their most basic, simple structure. Okay, let us move on a little bit more here. I know that there are lots of questions, and I think that we're going to see some of these being answered. So the order of testing, I've already addressed that. This is the first thing that you want to do after you've got your symptom tracker, right? Develop your order. And so, as I mentioned before, you can eliminate something like wheat or gluten throughout the entire time of the challenge and add it back last. In fact, some people, what they will do is add back their most challenging food, or the food that they believe that they have sensitivity to. Instead of having that first, they want to have it last. Because what could happen is if you do add it in first, you might get symptoms which may take you a couple of days to clear before you can introduce another food. So it's up to you. I've seen it done both ways. And again, just keep in mind that aphorism that I mentioned, that the food that we crave the most is probably the one that is keeping us in a state of dysfunction if we are not healthy. Okay, so here are some general senses of what to introduce and how much, because this is always the question as well. And don't get too hyper-focused on exact amounts, and everybody eats a little bit differently here. These are just some crude guidelines to give you a sense of what an average portion size might be. So what do you do? And I'll just run through a couple of these just so that you can get a good sense. So let's just jump down to tofu, since we were already going with that. So with tofu, how much would you normally introduce? And so here the general gauge, and this is, I think, pretty light, is ½ cup. I might even extend that into 3/4 of a cup, right, times 2. So these are, again, just general guidelines. This is not taking into account somebody's body composition, body size, caloric intake. These are just some general amounts to give you a good gauge. And so what I would say is just assess the portion for you, what you might normally consume, and then just increase that because you're then introducing that another time. And then if you feel, again, like your body is not very sensitive and not very good at responding, or you're not tuned into that, then bringing that in a third time. I'm going to bring up the corn one. This is one that I like very much, and people have had different responses to fresh corn or from processed corn in a tortilla format. So keep that in mind, that even when we are looking within one food category, we can really tease that out into multiple foods. So having frozen corn kernels, so in this case having 1 small cup of corn, half a cup of the corn kernels themselves, and then doing a separate challenge if you decide to do corn where you are looking at maybe a corn tortilla or a corn chip, which again is going to be a little bit more complex. A corn tortilla will be relatively simple, especially if you get the good, normal, healthy kinds that that I've seen in the store, which are made from organic corn and typically salt, a little bit of lime, and that's just about it. So whenever you can, and I know that it may not be possible to strip down the food entirely, just go with the most simple, basic ingredient list that you can. So when you are looking at gluten, and this is where you can see a lot of complicated gluten-containing products, right? So going with something like Wheatina, whole wheat noodles, like I'm thinking of a pasta, which would be 100% whole wheat and nothing else added, maybe just some salt typically with pasta noodles. But otherwise, that's a pretty pure food. Okay? All right. Let me just go through a couple more slides and then I'll take some more questions. And I think that a number of you are asking questions about this right now. So pitfalls of challenging foods. I just mentioned the chocolate example. So as we state here, chocolate candy also contains sugar, so beware of any reaction to a candy bar, as it will not be clear if there's a reaction to the chocolate or the sugar and even some of the other additives. So another one would be, do not challenge a mocha drink that contains coffee and chocolate, or a coffee drink that contains some alcohol. And that's pretty common sense, right, based on what we're talking about. You don't want to have the layering effects of foods. But ultimately, as you build up, and let's just say that you really do eventually want to partake and have chocolate that is 70% cocoa, doing first the cocoa, the pure cocoa, and then doing the sugar separately, and then seeing what your reaction is to both, and then ultimately doing that 70% cocoa bar of chocolate to see what your reaction is. I think that really and truly that's the best, most thorough way to do it, right? And in all cases, if you can, what you're trying to do is to circumvent any reaction that you might be having to toxins in the food. So whenever you can, choose the organically grown or grass-fed meats. You know, go with the highest choices when it comes to food, because you want to eliminate the potential that you are just reacting to toxins that are in that food. Okay? So for the purpose of the challenge, go with more pure foods whenever you can. So as I mentioned, if you're having any kind of reaction to a food, stop eating them and wait until those symptoms have cleared, even if it takes you a week. I remember that some people that I was working with would have some extensive gastrointestinal issues, and they were so sensitive that when they introduced something, that it took them a really long time to have their symptoms subside. And you don't want to keep layering foods in when you've got symptoms, right? You want to wait until that noise is cleared physiologically and then bring in another food. So again, there are all different things. You know, one of the things that I've noticed too, I didn't mention this, but having a runny nose after eating. I see this a lot with people when I go out to eat, and people blowing their nose. My husband is like this. You know, we'll eat something and then all of a sudden people are blowing their nose. And it's not because it was spicy food or it was hot or anything like that. That denotes a sensitivity. a potential sensitivity, or any kind of sinus congestion. And I typically see that with people when they're drinking red wine due to the sulfites. And again, that might also be connected to Candida because it is connected to the mucous membranes. Alrighty, so hopefully you've got some ideas of what reactions might be. You know, for me personally, I remember some years ago that I would respond with joint stuff. So my joints would get sore in my fingers, and I even would get these lesions on my fingers that were like just nodules. I mean, it was really, and I wasn't sure what I was eating, what I was being exposed to, but for me, it was my joints. And so for some of you with arthritis or prone to any kind of joint issues, you might see a worsening if you are sensitive. And again, back to even my dad's story of having this great reduction in his hip pain just by reducing a lot of these trigger foods for him. So just note that as well. Okay, so just some other things about removing foods associated with symptoms. So I just want to go through some points here because I'm seeing some questions come through that, again, are really connecting to what we have here. So if you've got foods that provoke symptoms, what you might want to do is refrain from eating them for about 3 to 6 months. And I would err on the side of 6 months. Give yourself a good solid 6 months without that food if you can prevent it. And then during that time, work on whatever you can to promote healing in the body. So you may want to work with a practitioner with medical foods, dietary supplements, etc., to go through what we would call even a 5R protocol to heal the gut. So that might be something that speaks to you. And, you know, again, just teasing out as many of the foods in a particular food category as you feel are appropriate. All right, somebody had a question about dairy. So within the dairy grouping, you know, I have seen that some people respond very differently, and myself included, to goat's milk versus cow's milk, even if I'm drinking or having something that's organic. So you might just respond differently to cow versus goat versus sheep. So if that is something that you'd like to explore, you might want to look into that. Now look at yogurt. With yogurt, if you really want to do this in the true, pure way, having yogurt without a lot of the sweeteners, without any potentially, and you have to read the ingredient label because it's going to look like it contains sugar because on the ingredient label it's listed as lactose. But essentially what you're looking for is added sugar. So getting a plain yogurt, if you want to try it that way, that is another option. And what I have seen is that some people that do respond to cheese and to milk don't always respond to yogurt. So it just kind of depends on the person. So again, you may want to tease through dairy if that feels right for you. Now, if you know that just outright you can't tolerate any kind of dairy, then by all means don't do it. Okay. I think... Now, I did mention this from the start, right? And this is already coming up on our Facebook page. What if the elimination diet didn't resolve your symptoms? Well, then there may be some other things that are underlying what symptoms you have or the condition that you have. Maybe it's not so much about food triggers, or maybe there are other food plans and protocols that need to be followed in order to address the underlying cause as to why you've got certain things going on. So, but the important part here is that you did spend the time going through an elimination diet. I think not having a resolution of symptoms will also tell you something, that perhaps there's more than the food, right? There's something else that needs to be looked at, or there could be other foods, right? So again, speaking to eliminating here, and this is back to the Candida question, certain sugars or removing nightshades. Now nightshades, this is something that came up time and time again on the page. This is something that you might want to try out where you have omitted nightshades, things like tomatoes, potatoes, eggplants, and peppers. And there is a whole list of the different nightshades, but those are that's the big clustering. What you may want to do is just omit them, continue to omit them, and then add them back in. And if you haven't omitted them for the elimination diet, what you want to do is wait for everything to subside with your food reintroductions, and then maybe do a separate, small, dedicated nightshade elimination. Unless you already know that you're sensitive to nightshades, right? Why would you include them if you're already sensitive? Okay. What needs to be done if it is uncertain whether a food reaction has occurred? I'm hoping that you could answer that immediately. So if you're having any symptoms and you're just not sure, what I would say is just retest it. Just retest it. And if then no reaction happens the second time, then chances are it's probably not a trigger food for you. Maybe it was just something circumstantial, something that happened for you within the course of that 1 to 2 days. If all trigger foods are avoided for 3 months, how does one know when it is time to eat them again? And after, again, that 3 to 6 month period, try to challenge the foods again. If there is a reaction, try again. So that's why doing a detox every 6 months is actually perfect, because you can reassess whether or not you are clear of any kind of reaction to that food, if that's continued on, or if maybe you're in the same state with your health and you again are having some reactions to that food. If a food is rechallenged and found to be acceptable, how often may it be eaten? So this is, I don't think any of us really know the true answer, although if you talk with a lot of food allergy specialists, what they would tell you is, again, the rotational plan of every 3 to 4 days, changing up your foods. And think about it, if you have leftovers, typically you eat a batch of soup for those days and then you toss it or you're done with it, right? You want to bring in new foods. This is so important. And then again, perhaps you won't be as prone to sensitivities and further on to allergies. All right, so what I want to do, I want to give thanks to everybody, and then I'm going to dive into all of Sarah's questions that she's got loaded up for me here. There are a lot of them. But I don't want to leave this evening without giving a huge, great, big thanks to everybody that has been involved. There have been so many wonderful practitioners through the Institute of Functional Medicine that have dedicated their busy days to spending time with all of us on the forum, and for that I'm really grateful. Really lots of incredible knowledge that we've had from all of these different practitioners. I mean, where else could you really go and have this type of experience, right? And then I'd like to give thanks to, on the food and spirit side, the wonderful hosts and people really behind the scenes that have made all of this happen, especially in terms of the logistics. So Markel, Sarah, Todd, Jillian have all been fantastic in really providing support all along the way. So I'm also very grateful, as I'm assuming that all of you are too, very grateful for having their assistance and having them weigh in on posts, and also Sarah's help with a lot of the logistics. And I want to, this is the last slide before I go into the questions. I also want to acknowledge all of the superstars in the group. And of course, all of you are superstars in your own right. And there are some of you that have gone over and beyond. You've been there for people. You have supported each other. You have chimed in on posts and really you put your full energy and effort into this detox challenge. And it wasn't just for yourself. It was also for others around you, and you were very inspiring as well as being informational with what you had to offer. So we have behind the scenes, I've collected some names on the IFM side and also on our side, on the food and spirit side. We've been looking to see who has been incredibly supportive of people within the detox challenge. And so I'd like to make special mention of these wonderful people. Chapman Gleason, who he mentioned he would be on the call tonight. So Chapman, wonderful to have your presence throughout the Detox Challenge. You have been a sheer delight, and people have clearly stated how much they appreciate your help and coaching throughout this process. Krissa Rich. Krissa, you've been great in terms of providing lots of different feedback on posts, links, and again, just being very inspirational. Mary, the same for you. I've noticed that you've been very attentive to posting and, again, being very supportive. Anne, Thora, and Laura, all of you the same. Thora, thank you for giving us the name of your spice company. And it was really fun when we were first talking about spices very early on in the challenge, and it was great to have a spice expert in the group to be able to share that. And you know, Anne and Laura chiming in with your pearls of wisdom as well. So on behalf of the Detox Challenge team, the collective that we are going to be sending to U6 a very special copy and thanks of the Nourish Your Whole Self card deck that I've created with the Food and Spirit team. So hopefully that will bring some inspiration into your meals. So we'll be reaching out to you to get your addresses to be able to send that out to you within a week's time or so. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes, and we've got a number of questions. So let me dedicate some time. Oh, my goodness, we've got a lot of questions. That's good. That's very good. All right, so Mary's asking, what should you do to combat extremely loose stools? Well, I think we have to first figure out why you're having extremely loose stools. When did it happen? When is it brought on? And what does it mean exactly to say extremely loose stools? Is it to the point of dehydration, losing electrolytes, feeling weak, feeling tired? What I would say there is, you know, definitely that requires a little bit more investigation. But let's just talk about it very generally in terms of just looking at loose stools, looking at how do we bulk up the GI tract with some good fibers, right? So fiber, especially insoluble fiber, to add some bulking might be helpful, and there are a variety of different fibers that are available. But again, I think it's a very incomplete answer to really give you the absolute without really knowing why you've got loose stools, because we want to get at the root. We don't want to just patch the symptom. That's not what functional medicine is. Functional medicine is all about uncovering why you've got loose stools. Okay, so just reading the next question here. So Angela is asking why 3, let's just see here. Sorry, I'm getting more questions and it's shifting all the questions. Okay, Angela asked why 3 weeks? Can they do less time? I'm assuming that you mean 3 weeks of a cleanse or a detox. My clinical experience has utilized 21 to 28 days. And I've actually talked to Mark Hyman because I know that he does a 10-day cleanse. And I've asked him on the Detox Summit, why does he do 10 days? Why not longer? And he said, because that's what most people are willing to do. So Angela, the question for you is, what are you willing to do? 10 days is better than no days. A little bit longer is always going to be a little bit better. So my experience has been to do 21 to 28 days. And the reason why I like 21 days is because some research has been shown, and you even hear this anecdotally, that it takes about 21 days to change a habit. So I like the 21 days just because it's the number 3. I like the number 3, 3 weeks, and that's what I've used clinically. And I've even gone to 4 weeks with many people as well. All right, next question. Rhonda asked in your soy example of adding in tofu for soy. Do you eat just tofu or other soy products too? Not sure if you're asking me about that personally or, okay, so just the skinny on soy. Lots of different questions, and I believe that soy has become a very emotional issue for many people. I don't know if it needs to be so emotional. I think if we look at the facts of soy, what we see, and I'm also reflecting the opinions of many functional medicine practitioners, is that organically grown soy, and that's the key phrase before soy, I'm not talking genetically modified soy, I'm not talking about adulterated soy products of any form, but the pure soy that is organic can really have some benefits in the way of hormone metabolism. I'll just take me as a personal example. For me, if I'm at high risk for breast cancer, you know, and I do watch my estrogen levels, and especially with a lot of the hormone-sensitive cancers, estrogen can be very aggressive in the body, and so looking at how these phytoestrogens, and it's really interesting because soy has had such a stigma. When you look at other foods like flax seeds are actually much higher in phytoestrogens than soy. So I think soy, I'm not sure why it gets all the emotional play it does, but I think that there's a medicinal reason to eat soy for certain people. And again, quality of soy is key. Am I blanket recommending soy for everybody? No, I'm not. What I'm stating is that phytoestrogens are found throughout the plant kingdom. So it's not just something that's inherent for soy. And the literature is such where, it's kind of mixed. It's mixed, and it just depends on, again, the population that we're looking at, how long somebody has been eating soy throughout their lives, etc. Gosh, we could have a whole lecture here just on soy, but I'm going to move on. Hopefully that answers your question, Rhonda. Teresa, you're asking, how long does it usually take for it to die out with no sugar or starch? I'm not clear what you mean by dying out. Maybe you're talking about the Candida organism or looking at certain microorganisms that are feeding off of sugar. Gosh, if that's what your question is exactly, it depends on so many different things. I think in any case, whether you've got Candida or other organisms, I think just in general, reducing sugar is a good way to go. Reducing refined products, an absolutely good way to go. These products can be very addictive, and they're high glycemic, they're inflammatory, and so whether or not you're worried about bad bugs, just in general, a good healthy way of eating involves eating reduced sugars, absolutely. And keep your eye on those high-intensity sweeteners. And I know that we toss around stevia sometimes, and definitely my guidance would be stay away from those artificial sweeteners. There was just a study that came out showing that we can get some gut microflora changes with artificial sweeteners, and that they can change our metabolism in ways that we didn't anticipate. I believe I posted that on Facebook. Okay, Louise asks here if it's possible to react to milk but not cheese. Yes, and that's because cheese undergoes various processes that sometimes reduces the lactose, and it kind of depends on the cheese too. Is it a moldy blue cheese, or is it a hard Gouda cheese? There are so many. I would say even within the cheeses, what I have done with people in the elimination diet is reintroduce different ones. All right. Okay, this is a good question. Susan is asking, how do coffee and alcohol fit into the reintroduction? Surely we don't drink 3 times a day of those products. Well, you're right. All right, so let's look at that one specifically. So with alcohol, what I would say is 1 serving of alcohol should give you some good information. And that would be what you would be doing on a daily basis, right? Or, just in terms of what is recommended or what is kind of the ceiling level on that. And for some people, I would say maybe it's not useful to be introducing alcohol. Now, if you've never had alcohol, does it make sense to introduce alcohol? No, it doesn't. Don't change your practices just for the sake of just trying things out unless you want to. With coffee, now that one could be a little bit different, right? So you might want to do an 8 ounce twice a day, and you might want to start that one a little bit earlier so that you're not up very late and very wired into the night. Let me just see here. We've got 1 minute before we close. All right, so there's a question about what is the difference between food triggers, sensitivities, and allergies. There is a section about this within your dietary guidebook, Yvonne, so I would say to read that. But essentially, allergies are a bit more classical in the way of engaging the immune system and creating a response in things like our antibodies. Our immune system gets engaged, whereas a sensitivity does not directly influence the immune system. It might indirectly influence the immune system, and we might just have symptoms without seeing any change to antibody levels. So it wouldn't show up as a classical IgG or IgE allergy, where we might get hives or sneezing, or, there might be some symptom like that, but we might have a sensitivity that might resemble vaguely some of those symptoms, but it doesn't have an antibody response. And typically an allergist would be somebody that, or even a functional medicine practitioner that does specific testing, could assess more of a standard allergy response. All right, well, it is 1 hour, and we are through a number of questions. I'm just kind of scanning them here. I think that a lot of your questions are about the duration and what foods to include and the formats and such. Go with your feeling on this. If you feel like, again, you want to extend this out a little bit more, why not? You put in all the effort, just extend it another week if you feel like that's the right thing for you to do, especially before we start getting into the holiday season with November, December, January. Those are all pretty difficult months when it comes to food. So if you can do all of this now and figure out what your potential food triggers are, what is giving you symptoms, what makes you feel inflamed, then I feel like you've got even better information going into the times of where eating becomes a little bit less stable. So see how you can do, and again, you're the one to decide. You are the overseer together with your healthcare practitioners of what your decisions ultimately are. So again, I think that the time that you've invested your energy in this 21-day detox challenge has been a great launch pad for continuing on. And I would say, we're definitely going to be offering detox challenges twice a year, jumping on board with us again or with other groups, whatever, or even just doing it yourself now that you have got all the materials. But it is really wonderful to experience this in a community, isn't it? It really speaks to the whole impact of sociogenomics, or the network effect of inspiration and information. So with that, I'm going to close and again, give a great big thanks to everybody that's been a part of this. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps even mentioning it right now. All of you, there have been 3,000 of you, to be exact, 2,902 people have gone through this detox challenge in varying degrees. We've got about 1,500 of you on Facebook. So it's just phenomenal to have this experience of lives being changed, you feeling transformed, and then creating a ripple effect through your own tribe and community around you. This is really groundbreaking stuff, and this is what can change our planet. So keep up the good work, and definitely keep in touch. And again, we'll be on the Facebook page for this last week. If we didn't answer your questions tonight, make sure you put them on the Facebook page, and we will answer them as best we can. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Take care. Bye-bye.